morning, good evening, or good afternoon, wherever and whenever you are listening in or watching today's podcast. I'm very honoured today to have Jason Megson, Managing Director and Vice President at George P. Johnson. Jason, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Adam.
Jason, to fill those in, I mean, who doesn't know what George P. Johnson does? If it's a brand in the events industry you've not come across, then where have you been hiding? But for those, in your own words, what does George P. Johnson do for the sector?
It's always difficult to try and put this in really simple terms, but we've been around for a long time, so we've actually adapted to what our clients come to us with since 1914, originally out of Detroit back then. Now in this current day, we operate predominantly as an event agency, a brand experience agency. So clients come to us with hopefully a brief and hopefully some objectives in terms of why they're doing what they're doing. And we help them bring that brief and that business objective to life in a live environment. Just now, perhaps we do it in a different environment, but on the whole, our last 100 or so years has been bringing to life clients' briefs, usually tied to marketing objectives in a live environment.
Yeah, and I've personally been fortunate enough to visit some of those. I know you work with Cisco. I've been to Cisco Live when it was back in Milan a few years ago. And obviously I'm kept abreast from your great PR company who, keeps me up to date with all the fantastic things that you do. It's interesting that you say when they come to you with a brief, how often does that happen? Or how often are those briefs kind of like really blue sky thinking you have to bring people down a little bit to more the reality of what can happen?
Yeah, I think clients, it's funny, and an event agency, when you first start an event agency and you get to a point where you get your first client brief as maybe an account lead or a senior producer, and you go through this sort of year of being really frustrated because you just don't know what the client actually wants. But then you need to put yourself in your client's shoes and realize that maybe it's part of their portfolio of things to do in that day or that year. It's a very, very small part, and they have lots of other pressures, whether they're commercial or different marketing channels that they have to consider. So, for us, we're always trying to support a client in giving us a great brief. And sometimes that means that it's quite an iterative process that we work with them on. And those are usually the ones that end up with the best brief and the best output. Because as soon as you're really, really clear in your objectives and your audience and some of those pretty fundamental things that deliver great work, you're going to get there unless you make some big mistakes.
I guess that's part of the value of the offering that an agency like yourselves brings though to the table, isn't it? It's being able to help that client and that customer tease out those ideas and those thoughts and those objectives and put them down on paper so ultimately that you can deliver on them. Because I would imagine that a lot of the time maybe people have a rough idea but need your guidance, and that's part of the value that you bring in.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's a typical day of a VP look like then at GPJ?
Well, firstly, I hate the term VP. It's a kind of thing.
We'll ditch that from now.
That's not your fault. That's just my title. I was kind of born with that almost in this role. But yeah, it's one of those sort of naming devices that's travelled the Atlantic, and it's part of my business card. But I think, in my role as managing director of the UK Nordics operation, it would be easy to say there's no typical day, but there's usually a few themes that play out across the day. I think certainly at the moment, one of our priorities as a business, and then hence one of my main priorities, is doing a lot of work with our team and our people. Mm-hmm. And then that would play out with discussions around particular clients and particular opportunities. And I might have conversations directly with clients or directly with team leads. And then also, in order to support all of that activity, both for clients and for our team, I have to be sort of constantly on top of some of the commercials and the financials. So it's actually a really, really great role. Sometimes I'm really lucky to have a fantastic supportive team at GPJ around me who say, God, it must be so hard. There's so much pressure. But actually, the diversity of it means that even when in some areas there's significant pressure points, because it's so diverse, it kind of takes the heat off maybe an area where you need to focus a bit more time and effort, and perhaps it is a bit head scratching. So I love it. I love the diversity of it.
I'm the same. I've got a very diverse role at Event Industry News. I get sometimes involved in client meetings and sales and editorial and podcasts and all that kind of stuff. And I personally wouldn't have it any other way. And I think that's something that actually we try and cultivate within our team, to have them doing more than one thing, rather than just one sole thing, especially at the moment being, either remote or working from home and stuff. I think that's really important. What's the general feeling from an agency like yourself in the, as we, elephant in the room, we're still in the midst of a pandemic. I guess we don't have a start date yet for any events here in the UK specifically. What's the feeling like at GPJ?
Yeah, I mean, it's a real roller coaster. It certainly has been since the beginning. I think since even this, I suppose the first kind of bellwether bit of noise for us, particularly in Europe and the UK, was when Mobile World Congress was cancelled.
Mm-hmm.
And then since then, there's been lots of highs and lows. And some of those, without being too melodramatic, there's a bit of a sort of existential crisis for the industry at the moment, because we're trying to work out, where do we have meaning and purpose and value, and how can we add that into this really uncertain environment that we're in? So it is pretty challenging. I certainly applaud those in the industry that are continuing to be sort of optimistic, and those that are just looking at a little poster behind you talking about pivoting into different areas where they can deliver experiences, perhaps in a virtual and a hybrid world. And we're certainly doing that too. But there is just so much uncertainty, and linked to that, such a rapid pace of change, that, hey, it's not easy. And, I think for me in my role and with the team at the agency, it's just about being really, really honest. And, and also being honest about the fact that we don't have all the answers. I think we started with a sort of optimistic leadership view of, we don't have a crystal ball, but by God, this will recover in this way and we'll be stronger after it. And then I think we got past that because of the extended nature of the crisis. And we've just felt that the best way to move forward is just be really, really honest, really transparent, sharing, where as a business we're having to take some risks, make some bets, and understand that based on those risks and those bets, we may make it through looking this shape, and we may make it through looking that shape. But if we're all kind of aware of them, then there'll be no really nasty surprises for people. But even then, it's tough. It's tough.
I'm putting you on the spot here, but can you share what some of those risks, those rolls of the dice might look like? I think everybody's kind of searching for information, advice, thoughts, even if they don't necessarily agree with them, because at least it helps them frame how they're feeling a little bit better. If you can share, that is.
No, I can share bits of it without giving away our entire business strategy.
Sure.
I mean, I think we're trying to take a pragmatic view about what the medium term looks like. And I think the medium term for us, with a UK client base and a quite sort of regional European client base, is that until we get to the point that we have some real clear guidance, but probably most importantly, a vaccine for coronavirus, we're not really going to be able to get past that glass ceiling and where we're going to be able to deliver events at significant scale. I have no doubt that we will operate within the realms of some of the great work that a lot of associations and agencies like us are supporting in terms of what's safe and returning to events. I think we've got to be honest about the fact that in order to accelerate back into any kind of normality, we need to get through this sort of medium term kind of hiatus that, we may be out of lockdown, but we're now in the, oh gosh, this is where we've got to roll our sleeves up and get through another tough period. So we're sort of retooling our business so that we can have as much flexibility to adapt to opportunities and client needs within that sort of middle period.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And I think, what I've been saying to people is that our as a sector, our job is to overcome challenges. That's what we do, we have to keep people safe. We have to deal with crowds. We have to deal with hygiene, risk assessments, difficult situations, difficult venues, and there's so many spinning balls. I think there's a meme that goes around which on the face of it, somebody looks really calm at the front of house, and then back of house they look an absolute mess. And there's some truth in that, in the sense that everything that is going off behind that these spinning plates is kept behind the scenes, and for everybody else it looks all really smooth. So for me, if we can move ahead, and I'm personally looking for the government to engage with us, we seemed a little ignored at the moment, considering how fundamentally underpinning we are for every sector out there in terms of business and trade and economy happening. That's the thing I'm hoping. We're recording this podcast on the 16th of July, And for me, every day that tips away is another day far too long at the moment.
Yeah.
So we'll hopefully see something come from that. But as soon as we do get that information, whether that's a start date, whether that's a procedure, whether that's a level that we need to get to, then I think as an industry we'll really start to turn a corner in terms of that focus and moving on and helping our customers bring events, face-to-face events back. I guess my next question to you is then, I want to come on to the pivot thing because I think it's an interesting one from an agency point of view, and I'm sure live streaming and all that kind of stuff is nothing new to you guys. But coming back to your team, how have you been supporting your staff and team that are probably kind of separated out at the moment? How's that been working from an operational point of view and a company point of view?
I think if we look at this, the first part, which is working remotely, working from home, the environment that we're talking to each other now, that's something that actually we adapted to really quickly and wasn't that challenging. Even for, and we were surprised by that, but then I suppose by the very nature of what we do, and because we work remotely often when we're with clients on site or when we're in different markets in different countries, we were able to adapt to that really quickly. So I think being able to maintain some cohesion and an agency culture with a working from home environment was a success, despite the fact that I was very sad about our beautiful office in London being very empty and some of our plants dying and some of those simple things like that. And so that was a win. I think when, being really, really honest with you, I think when we got to the point where for us it seemed sensible and prudent to utilise the job retention scheme and furlough, I think our experience of that is that that's been tough.
Yeah.
Because it's really difficult. You got some competing kind of forces where you want to make sure that those individuals in certain roles who are on furlough are able to get some breathing space and they're not being abused in the sense of, you hear some kind of not so savory stories about people being on furlough and still working, right? And that's absolutely not in the spirit of what it's meant to do, and frankly, we've been very, very careful about that. But then keeping those people connected with the agency has been really tough because of those competing forces. And we've done a lot of things that I think have worked well, but I think in general, if you move from a working and home environment to then being on furlough, that's like a sort of double isolation hit.
Yeah.
And I think that's been tough for people, and we've taken on a lot of feedback. We've created like well-being chat channels, initiatives around it. We did our own lockdown cookbook, where everyone contributed. Trade bakes are very popular at the moment. So we've been, and quizzes and some of the things that everyone's been working on. But I still think it's been really hard for any business, never mind ours, to crack that very sort of tricky isolationary feeling of being on furlough. And that's been tough.
I think that's a really good point. Putting those initiatives, like you say, the jovial stuff, the relaxing stuff. But for me, I see many companies that have a culture where, that, as my missus calls it, it's my second life. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's you have these work families, don't you, and relationships that ultimately take up sometimes, especially in the events industry, more than that standard 8-hour day. You spend so much time around these people that to have that almost taken away through no choice becomes really kind of jarring, I think.
Yeah.
I personally have found that it was interesting for me. I've worked away from the rest of the team for the last decade and plus. So for me, not having an office, there's been no change there, but it's actually not been going to be able to go to events. And that's really strange for me. Asked me 6 months ago, I'd probably be saying, I've seen the last trade show I want to see. I've seen the last event. I don't want to go to another press launch or something like that. But now I think I'd go to anything. I think I'd go to the opening of a dog home. So it's really interesting how, like you say, it's a transition into this environment where it's almost like a prison, weirdly. It's really good to hear that you've been doing all those things. I'm interested to see what the winning recipe is for the tray bake. Maybe we get a blog post up about that. The Johnson
I
tray
can
bake.
certainly share that with you. Yeah, so I'll share that with you. It's a good one.
I'm assuming here that you've been helping a lot of your customers transition or do something online. How do you personally feel about online events and what the future might hold when face-to-face events actually can take place again.
Yeah, well, as you asked, how do you personally feel? I'll be very honest. I feel very sad about
Okay,
it.
yeah. No, I want truth and honesty, because
um,
it's not all roses.
I think I think it's a necessity, and I think when you link that back to maybe some of those more fundamentals around what businesses need to achieve commercially or with communications, etc., then it's absolutely the right thing for certain businesses to do and to be supported by agencies like ourselves in order to adapt to that environment. But to your previous point around, how you would go to the opening of a dog home, I think as individuals and human beings, never mind the fact that we're so closely linked to the event industry, we're just desperate to get out and socialize.
Mm.
So on a personal level, I'm really sad that I spend a lot of time talking about virtual events and virtual event platforms and the technologies. But then when you put your professional hat on, you say, okay, well, let's just think about why we're actually doing this. This is not because, I want to go to a music festival. This is because this business that I'm supporting needs to get this message out, needs to talk about this new product, needs to meet in some form. And
Yeah.
so let's do our best to support them.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's nothing new. I think there's obviously been an explosion of adoption, should we say,
Yeah.
through no real choice other than really there is no other choice.
Yeah.
And I personally am a massive fan of tech. Clearly, I write about it a lot. I've got two events that support the sector and the knowledge share and the learning and the purchasing of that. I don't see it being a replacement, far from it. I think it might actually create lots of opportunity, but at the end of the day, it's a tool. It can never replace that serendipity that happens, or that feeling. It's kind of like saying, it's the same if you bought something from Amazon or John Lewis. For me, going into John Lewis, purchasing something, having that tactile interaction with it, trying it on, seeing what it looks like. That's what real events are all about. The feeling that you come away with.
Yeah.
Amazon or online events are a process in order to get something, information, leads generation, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Is there anything that on that side of stuff though that does interest you? Do you see anything that is a good opportunity and a focus for you and your customers?
Yeah, I think you're right to mention the fact that what's being interesting about these circumstances is that it has revealed where there are some more interesting opportunities around how technology can augment or add to or enhance an experience. And that, the spotlight's very much so on the platforms, the providers, how you work with technology to get the best possible experience. Because as you mentioned with Amazon, that's a commoditized transactional experience, and you're really pleased that it really works, but you're not excited about it. But what it does do, and which is also interesting as well in terms of opportunities, is there's been this sort of ongoing, interesting debate around how we can improve our metrics from an ROI perspective, all the data that's out there, big data, etc. With this period and everyone's focus and acceleration into digital technologies to support events, it will give us more capability, more understanding, more products in the kind of technology suite that will help us to start to really get under the skin of the quantitative ROI. Now, I, like you, believe that there's something serendipitous and beautiful about real life events. And that's really the qualitative stuff that we always wax lyrically about. And that's why we create amazing things, that sort of balance of art and science.
Yep.
But I do think that it's certainly an opportunity with all the uptake and usage of technology to get under the skin about how we can accelerate into a more balanced view of where ROI is for events in B2C, B2B, any kind of event.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
I don't know whether you'd agree with this, and I don't want to put words into your mouth at all. But coming from a publisher's perspective, our job is to ultimately engage 250,000 people in the industry every year through continually delivering content. And the engagement that exists there tends to actually happen more on other platforms like social media, Twitter, Facebook. That's where the conversation happens rather than necessarily Facebook with people commenting and stuff. But we provide information and we provide the tools in order for people to have those conversations. And I wonder whether, as a whole, some organisations will use events online almost as a way to continually publish and connect. There's been this idea of this 360 day, 65-day engagement platform, unicorn kind of thing. And I still don't know if we're even 10% of the way there. But I almost wonder if we'll see a lot of organisers, maybe not corporates, but the run-of-the-mill organisers kind of move that way with their events becoming part of publishing and keeping a community together. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And that you've even seen that in the publishing world over the last 10, 15 years. You know, publishers have been part of the sector that have really got under the skin of the value of events and how it can be a super channel for them to, in essence, kind of self-perpetuate this kind of content wheel. So of any industry that's almost done it right and have this kind of always-on platform, publishing are closest to that nirvana. But I think you're right. Some maybe smaller businesses will do it, but they'll do it almost subconsciously because they just know it's the right thing to do. And whereas the bigger corporates may find it, although I believe this period will accelerate it, they may find it a bit harder to break out of their silos of how they divvy up their marketing spend and who's responsible for what and where the ROI goes from each of those particular silos. But now's the time to kind of rip up the rule book and think about it a bit more holistically, for sure.
Yeah. I suppose leading on from that then, you know, one of the things that became very apparent to me for some organisations, not all, because I've been to your offices in London and I know you actually have people almost kind of, I think you call it the GPJ lab, that are actively looking at what technologies and what platforms and what solutions can be used. And that can be anything from as far as VR and AR and drones right down to, you know, the run-of-the-mill systems that we see as part of the events industry. But one of the elements that I saw in terms of a lack of readiness on whole from the industry was the skills and the skills gap that was apparent from people, and some of those being digital skills, maybe even people being thrust into dealing with things that they would have never ever dealt with before, things like live streaming, you know, platforms, even GDPR hurdles around people being visible online, things like that.
Yeah.
What skills do you think that as an industry that we should be encouraging to nurture through our businesses in order to kind of make us stronger in those areas, to be able to track that ROI, but also to be able to, God forbid, there be another pandemic and we all go home again, to put us in a better position to switch quicker or to be more resilient?
It's a good question. I think an area that I've always admired, if you look at some of the adjacent kind of communications sectors in the creative industries, is the digital agency landscape. And then also linked to that, maybe some of the technology companies that actually gratefully we work with as part of our client group. But some of the methodologies, if you kind of strip it back to ways of working where you can learn around things like project management, whether it's sprints, agile, you know, scrums, all these sort of technology buzzwords that actually, when you start to get involved in them, are really interesting and innovative ways of working, versus perhaps, if I'm being a little bit harsh on maybe the more traditional event agency world or event planning world, is maybe from the genesis of, you know, real brutal big project planning, kind of construction sites, etc. I think those are really, really interesting skill sets and perhaps even training opportunities for any event business. And then linked to that, that supports a kind of fundamental, I suppose, delivery engine and way of working that just means you can do things faster. And the future for us is going to be continued flexibility, and then linked to that as an individual, curiosity, because you have to want to learn. Yeah. Because things change so fast, you have to want to learn. Yes, you have to be passionate about what we deliver. Absolutely, that's a fundamental. But you have to continue on a learning journey. You can't in this industry, especially now, be a person whose mindset is, oh, but we've always done it this way, or this is the only way it works, because that's out the window. And this has certainly focused our minds on that type of, I suppose, mindset not being fit for purpose for the future. So I think there's lots to learn around there. And then also in creativity as well, if you look at some of the, not so much, it's a little bit of a methodology, but more around how maybe the digital creative industries have looked at planning out user experience and different types of engagement and how that's mapped and delivered, and also just how that's sold to clients. there's some really interesting ways that we can learn from that particular sector. And in essence, some of that helps us to simplify some of the things that we already sell to our clients. And they say, well, why is it good? And we just say, well, it just is good. And then actually, it's, no, it's good because we've done this, this, and this, and considered X, Y, and Z. So yeah, I think there's lots to learn.
I think you make some amazing points there around both the level of interest that you have, but also the creativity as well. Because again, taking your example of seeing the need to have people that are dedicated to explore and understand and go outside of the realms of what is traditional, and then layered on top of layering that, let's say it's technology on top of the creativity, or the creativity on top of the technology, whichever way you want to sandwich it. That's where some of those great things can happen. And I think we're in a stage at the moment where on the technology side, it's kind of like Apple, in terms of there was this big light bulb moment maybe 10 years ago, and it was kind of like the Apple iPhone moment, that this was something really new and there's lots of things. Now it's, for me, on the technology side, it's almost refinement and iteration. So we're getting a better version of what we've had before, maybe with easier access data, or more being able to interpret that data more better on the technology side. But actually, it's the creativity that's then layered on top of that that makes that technology the wow, right? Take drones for effect. Drones, a bit boring for me personally. Yeah, okay, I can fly one around. But sync 1,000 of those up in the night sky as part of a light show, that's the creative part, isn't it, that people really need to do. I personally would like to see, I think our industry is so interesting, and one that actually needs to attract more of what I see in terms of really forward-thinking people, actually in the larger corporate big tech side. Those kind of places that move those companies on leaps and bounds over the decades. If we can attract some of that into our sector, maybe that's around digital, maybe it's around creativity, maybe it's some of those creative digital agencies that you mentioned yourself, then I think we'll be so much stronger, because we've got the piece down about, we know how to make people feel good once we've got them on an event site in a venue, right? We know how to do that. But if we can pinpoint all of that, I'm going back to our earlier point of maybe not being seen as an important sector by government, then I think we'll be in a much stronger place going forward.
No, I totally agree. And I think that there's the point, particularly around government, is it's a little bit of a sort of psychological hangover from the role that we play in delivering the event. We are, no disrespect to what you're wearing just now, Adam, but we are the people that get a kick out of wearing black t-shirts and hiding at the back.
It's the first time I've worn a black t-shirt in
but it's and I am picking on you, but I'm not, because I know you're not like that. But my team want to be the people in the black t-shirts at the back of an event, just marveling at what they've helped create, but they don't want to be on stage saying, look at what we created. And I think you're sort of, that kind of mindset is manifesting itself a little bit now, where we really do need to shout loud and proud about what we do. And we're sort of struggling to kind of coalesce together and have one voice. But I know that there's some steps being made, but I think that's been tough for us to be front of stage rather than back of house.
Yeah, I don't want to mention quite right now, because I think what I'm aware of happening at this moment in time, especially over the last couple of days, will probably be old news by the time that this podcast is published. But I totally agree with you. To the associations that are representing us around the globe, I think individually they are doing a fantastic job. They're doing their best. Because let's be honest with you, on the whole, associations are people within the industry that have got other full-time jobs, and they've got probably their own businesses and all that kind of stuff. It's very much a voluntary offering. However, I think back to your point is, we now need forever and for the future to have a way for all those associations to come together to bring a single voice to business, industry and government, because it'll just be stronger, it'll be more cohesive, it'll be more joined up. And it's not like we're a small industry, we're trillions of dollars in terms of overall business turnover and influence and stuff. So that's the one. I've called it the Knights of the Round Table. One person from each association that comes, and maybe they meet regularly and often and communicate about the next big risk or the next big thing that might, be something that as an industry we need to take over. And even, joined up on topics and subjects like diversity and inclusion and things like that. I see lots of pockets of these things setting up within each individual association, and absolutely that needs to happen to service their members in the way that they need. Because even though we call it the events industry, exhibitions are slightly different to corporate events, and corporate events are different to experiences and things like that. So I get that. But on the whole, these are industry-wide topics, and this very much so. It feels to me like, again, we could have been in a better place to deal with this head-on 6 months ago.
Yeah.
Final question for you. What is the big topic for you, other than the pandemic, that you think we need to discuss and have a more open conversation with as a sector?
Well, there's two, but you only want me to have one.
You can absolutely have two.
Well, you mentioned one already, which is about diversity and inclusion. And I think a lot of individuals and a lot of the industry has been caught a little bit off guard. And not so much maybe off guard's the wrong word, but maybe even a little bit flat-footed about how quickly this has moved back up to the top of the agenda, and quite rightly so. And then also we're grappling as an industry about how we get our head around it and how we actually take action to support a more diverse and inclusive industry. I don't by any means think that we're in a place where we've got big problems, but I think the important thing which underpins this whole movement at the moment is it's not about, focusing in on saying, oh, we're all right, we've got no problems here. It's actually about taking action to continue to push forward and be more diverse and more inclusive. I think we've got a lot of work to do there across the industry. And I hope that we're able to come together in some ways to make some positive steps, even in the environment of that we're in right now, where we're sort of struggling with some really tricky commercial challenges.
Yeah.
So that's certainly one. And I would never have, I would always be striving to create a sort of diverse and inclusive agency if you'd spoken to me in January, but it's way up the top of my agenda now. I'm absolutely behind it. I want to make sure that we can make some progress there. So that's one. The second one has got to be sustainability. And I'm really out of many of the things that I'm not so optimistic about at the moment, because I'm just trying to be a pragmatist. I'm really optimistic that in the next 12 to 18 months, the industry can come together and we can make a genuine difference and make some good progress around sustainability. Whereas I think we've really struggled to either consider it, understand it, come together behind that particular topic, which is hugely important. And we can create some positive change there, because we do have a negative impact historically. So those for me are the two biggies. They're a bit obvious, but I think it would be just mad for me not to mention how important they are.
I think, yeah, they are obvious. Again, I don't think enough is discussed on both of them. On the diversity point of view, I'm at the point where I'm learning. I don't know enough. I'm trying to engage with individuals that do and are very clear on what change needs to happen, what needs to be discussed. Actually, more also over it's not about what needs to be discussed, it's how we start to implement change and agree on what that change looks like and all that kind of stuff as a sector. So very much with you on that. Sustainability, I'm almost expecting somebody to come out with a report at the end of the year saying how sustainable our sector has been over the last 12 months, but maybe that underlying that of the fact that no events have happened. But you are right, again, it's a fine balance, isn't it, between focusing on keeping people at home, because that doesn't really help events in terms of travel and that impact that has. But there's no denying the fact that as an industry, we build and break for the moment, and I think we can do better now. My own opinion, and again, engaging with agencies like yourself, I know that there are moves being made to come up with an agreement on what measures or how we measure sustainability as an industry, because that's one of the really difficult things, especially when I've looked into it before. Is like what's being measured, how is it being measured, what's the validity of it being measured, that kind of stuff. So I think if we can get that to a sector and start to create trends and benchmarks within sustainability, then we can absolutely move the needle. And it also puts everybody on a level playing field, because let's be honest about it, it's commercial most of the time. It's a choice of material, of production, of delivery, and all that kind of stuff. And we also have clients that are putting pressure on to, do things cheaper or more efficiently. And they're not always ones that unnecessarily have their eye on sustainability because they see themselves as one event of many. So what does that impact really mean? But we're viewing it from obviously a whole sector point of view. So I'm absolutely with you on there. So we'll have to invite you to be one of our judges next year on the Sustainability Event Awards, which is an initiative that we launched. Because again, I think we saw that although there were pockets of recognition for sustainability, there needed to be this overriding kind of like focus on it. And it's something we're certainly taking more of an editorial look at over the next 12, 20, well, forever, not just over the next 12 months. So I absolutely agree with you on that. Jason, I appreciate you're super busy, even though you're working from home. Where can people connect up with you if they want to reach out to you and discuss any of these points further?
Do you know what? I'm terrible on most of the social channels, but I'm a slave to the corporate world of LinkedIn. So they can reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's my most active channel. If you find me on Twitter and Instagram and all these others, I'm appalling and I'm constantly getting told off. But at LinkedIn, I'm very active.
I don't think anybody wants to look at my Instagram. It's just pizza and beer and
that sounds good.
Dog. far too telling of my lifestyle. That's what I say. I'm with you. LinkedIn's the way forward because it's all the corporate stuff there. Jason, I've really enjoyed today. I'm sure we'd love to get you back as a guest again. Maybe when events can go back and we're into that and we can talk to you about some of the stuff that you guys are delivering and stuff. Thank you very much for coming on today. And for those that are listening or watching, if you'd like today, please do give it a like and a share. Share with your network what me and Jason have discussed today, and because that really helps spread the information. Jason, thanks again, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thank you.